morning, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, back-to-back sessions, a lot of information, exciting days at DES. So the theme today in most of the sessions is GenAI, LLMs, agents, all of that impacting across the data lifecycle, right? So what we will look at in this session is to try to take a meta view, look at certain trends, broader implications, and hopefully gain some insight out of this. So let's just first quickly baseline what we are looking at, right? So this is something that all of you know by now, that LLMs are text-based, that's where they started, then they have got multimodal. Coding has become one specific focus area for the LLMs. They are Turing complete. They are creative in the sense they are able to create stuff that they've not seen before. And they are getting autonomous. There are new capabilities like deep research, thinking, that will all come together to make this agentic era become real. So if that's what are the capabilities, what are the vendors claiming now as the next steps, right? So you see the big product vendors, Google, Microsoft, claiming 25% of my code is written by GenAI, 30% of my code is written by GenAI. Then Anthropic, which is the leading vendor in the code automation space or code creation space, is claiming that we can do 90 to 100% of code generation will be through GenAI in the future. Of course, their timeline is 2029, 2030, but that's the claim, right? And on the other side, you can also see that the ChatGPT, which is OpenAI, which brought to fore all this for the consumer space, Sam Altman is claiming that 10% of humanity has used ChatGPT, which is like more than 500 million users on a weekly active basis. It's a lot of stuff, right? Now, vendors will claim what they want to claim. What are third-party vendors and assessment analysts, what are they claiming, right? So if you look at that, if you look at a research report McKinsey put last year, they said 92% of companies are increasing their investment in AI. The question then is, what are the other 8% doing? Probably they've already reached the peak of their investment. Then you have the UN report, which is worried about trade and development, looking at jobs and how jobs are going to be impacted. They're talking about 40% of jobs getting impacted. Doesn't mean 40% of jobs will get automated. Activities within 40% of jobs are going to be impacted by how GenAI is going to operate. Then you have Gartner, which has this hype cycle, which talks about how the new technologies evolve. It evolves in a cycle where initially there's some skepticism, it's not going to do well, it may not make such a big impact, and then slowly there is an acceptance, and at some point there is a hype is more than the substance. You see that a lot of claims, hey, GenAI is going to bring world peace and hunger, but world peace is done by Donald Trump, so we don't need to worry about that. So that's the kind of thing that there's a lot of hype, but the fact that it is at the peak of the hype cycle doesn't mean it's bad, right? So it means the next stage is adoption into production systems. There is a plateau of productivity which will come. There is a light trough of disappointment. Then we'll follow that plateau of productivity where more and more adoption of these things into production systems, real-world scenarios come into play. The other interesting thing, which again plays into this standardization of features, right? All of the big vendors have same features in their products, right? So all multimodal, code, generative, as well as thinking, deep research, all of these vendors have the same features. It's only a question of which one is more competent for the job that you want it to do. There is standardization that way, and there are also industry protocols coming in which are getting adopted by multiple vendors, right? So you see MCP came from Anthropic, but MCP is being supported by OpenAI. A2A, agent-to-agent framework came from Google, but it's getting again adopted by OpenAI and others. So the industry is maturing. They're not competing for everything. They're collaborating where there is going to be greater adoption. They're competing where there is going to be a deeper silo that they can generate for themselves. Now, if you look at it, how do you look at progress of how agents and GenAI is going to work, right? So there is this institute called METR, which is model evaluation and threat research. They look at how the models are performing. They've looked at agentic performance. They have a database of 1,000+ tasks and activities. They compare how a human does and how an agent does. The measurement of time is based on how much the human takes to do that task, and the measurement of the agent is how accurate it is to do the same task, right? So they kept a threshold of 50% accuracy and then looked at over time from 2020 to 2025, how is the performance of the agent evolving, right? The trend they came up, this report came about 2-3 months back, is that the agent performance window, right? So the length of the task is expanding, doubling every 7 months, right? We're all familiar with Moore's law for semiconductors. This is like the agent version of Moore's law. Now, of course, last month somebody else did a research on top of this and said, no, if you look at the window just from 2024 to 2025, the acceleration is every 4 months it's doubling, right? It's not every 7 months. So capability is evolving very fast. If you look at that, then this is the estimate that you see, for how much the agent may 2029, 1 man-month of effort can be done by an agent without an intervention. 50% of the time, right? So it's, don't take this too literally. It is a measure of progress. It is not a measure of 100% success rate for this length of tasks, right? They are able to tackle a task of this length half the time successfully is how they are measuring it. So look at it as a trend that we are looking at it, right? If this is the case, right, so GenAI can do a lot of stuff. So we look at what can it do for the enterprise. It is applicable for a lot of functions across the enterprise. If you look at it, right, when it started, one of the themes that came up was the board GPT, right? You could put instead of a board member for an organization, you could have a LLM sitting there and asking the questions and collating the inputs and providing some insight, right? So that's the strategy part of it, right? So of course, asking questions is much easier. All of us can do it. Finding the answers is where it's a little more complicated kind of work, right? So AI can impact strategy. It can give suggestions. It can give thoughts. It can run a strategy workshop virtually, asking the right questions based on certain set of guidelines and data. It can bring that knowledge to fore, right? Then if you look at it, AI for process. A lot of business processes are going to be impacted by GenAI, right? We see this. There's still a lot of clerical workforce which is still persisting because there's some degree of knowledge, some degree of discretion which cannot be automated through the legacy technologies that we have. But with GenAI, this can be attacked more effectively. So this is one sliver which is going to be much more impacted than anything else. We see this as one area that will become very critical for the enterprise. Then you have data, which we'll talk about a little bit more, where we can look at from ingestion to consumption, which is for insights, how it gets impacted. So that's the strength of it. Then when you have support, support when you're saying tech support or support for platforms and data engineering systems, that also has a lot of agentic approaches that can help solve for it, right? So in one of the sessions earlier, I think there was a talk about how agents can help with support as well. Now, if we will focus on just the second part of this, that is the data and the other processes, rather than look at the enterprise level of things. Now, if you're looking at this, how do we break this down? We look at it through 3 vectors in which you can analyze this. One is the data engineering lifecycle. There are a bunch of activities that we do. These activities can be reimagined using some GenAI accelerators or code generation agents or others. That is one step. The second thing is any such paradigm that comes, a new paradigm comes, it also brings its own wave of new type of demand or an acceleration for certain kind of work, which is fresh work that will have to be done to enable that paradigm to be successful. That's the one about new demand patterns, right? Then it impacts all of us in the sense on our day-to-day life, we end up using GenAI. The enterprise incorporates GenAI into a lot of the work processes that we do. How do we look at that and rewire ourselves to use it more effectively? These are 3 vectors that we'll explore to see how we can um, make it, right? So first part is looking at reimagining the solutions, right? This is a traditional view of medallion architecture, and then a semantic layer, and then a consumption layer. Across these things, we could look at it from a perspective of what kind of accelerators can be produced using GenAI to solve problems. So if you look at it, the first sliver of things is a data pipeline built from a perspective of data modeling and understanding the data structures, creating the source to target mapping, as well as creating the automated conversion of those source to target mappings as code, right? There's a session already earlier today which walked through this in pretty good detail by our engineers. So that's one way of looking at it at the discovery and the initial build of the data warehouse. The second is code assistance, right? So one is code migration. You could call it as transpiling, moving from one architecture to another, one platform to another, right? SQL to PySpark, so on and so forth, can be done much faster using accelerators that we can bring in forth from a GenAI perspective. You have code assistance when you want to write new functions. This is popular Cursor, Databricks Genie and such, which can help you, or custom models that you build based on your own code base, learning your own accelerators, templates, your coding standards, which can generate compliant code that is without you having to write the code, right? So you can still give directions and make it work. Then you have synthetic test data generators to help you test it without having to go into production systems and collect the data. Of course, you could have data wrangling to understand what's happening when new sources come in and something is not fitting into the patterns that you have. The third set of things that we have is governance. You have, and I think that's the theme that you've seen through some of the other sessions as well, the data governance, AI governance becomes very important in this scenario where you have new data coming in, there is an automated operation happening. How does LLM understand data? What guardrails do you build in terms of data governance practices? How is your data catalog enriched? All of this can take the use of GenAI, but GenAI will also take the use of this to make themselves more relevant, right? In terms of data assets, right? So one of the things that we saw is you have, when a newcomer comes to an organization from a business function, there is a whole ton of data assets that they're there, and they need to come in and say, I need access to ABC. And they have to rely on the tribal knowledge. Somebody has to tell them, hey, this is the things that you need to get access to. Something from a GenAI perspective, you can enable a search, metadata search, which helps them say, I am the sales manager, joined for this jurisdiction. Tell me what are the assets that I should request access for. And then take that list and make the access request. Somebody else will review and approve it if that's what your role should provide you the access to, and so on and so forth, right? So the last kind of activity that GenAI will transform for sure is support. You have automated understanding of tickets, auto-healing. You can have log analytics, looking at your logs, proactively addressing predictive monitoring. You have the financial part of it, cost optimization enabled through your GenAI-based accelerators, observability to see what is happening in your business process and address it, kind of an X-ray vision for making sure that the processes are working as intended. On the consumption layer, right? So you have a lot of data in the ecosystem, and knowledge-based search is going to make it much easier for people to understand how to relate to the data. And the other area that we see quite a bit of transformation would be on the BI side, right? There is a bloat of BI dashboards across the place, and just going from one dashboard to another for newcomers and everybody else is not very useful. Very periodically, organizations come in and say, can we rationalize BI, right? So remove things that are not being used. Because somebody came, they said, I need this dashboard. They used it for a few weeks, and then it fell into disuse, but it's still there, maintained, all of that stuff. So a prompt-based chat interface to give you insights. So it's not just going to give you a visualization, it's going to come and say, hey, why is the sales for product X dropped in the last 4 weeks? And then it will look at all the data, come back saying, okay, this is the actual data, these are my observations on why it has come down. And you could further even ask, what would be your recommendation? So it goes beyond just consumption of data or insight. It can even be a recommender engine. You can go through this entire cycle using this kind of a prompt-based chat interface for insights. Now, the thing that we need to look at is every few years there is a paradigm shift in technology, right? So when we look at GenAI, we can of course make our own observations, but we can learn from the previous paradigm shifts that we have seen. And in the first slide, I said, the UNCT, I put it, we are in the 5th industrial revolution. Revolution is a very strong term, right? It's like killing everything and starting again. Whenever I hear revolution, I can only think of the French Revolution and the guillotine and all that dramatic activity. But paradigm shifts are, waves of changes. It's a rapid evolution where you go into a new way of working, new operating model that changes things for you, right? So if you look at it, over the last 30 odd years, you could look at 3 paradigm shifts that we have gone through in this context of engineering, right? The first one was in the Y2K and offshoring mix. That's when, people started moving away effectively from green streams, the mainframes, the AS400s and all of that, and then got into this ERP, RDBMS, all of these waves accelerated during this time, right? So it doesn't mean that mainframes have gone away, they still exist, but there's a very clear trend away from it. Then if you look at cloud was the next big thing, right? So you wanted to build e-commerce websites that take a lot of clickstream data, look at it, and then recommendations, all of that stuff. Then NoSQL became quite important, right? So again, I'm taking slivers that are more relevant to data here. Each of these have multiple ways in which you can look at it. There are more interactions that you have. And then the whole wave of, there was at certain time, there was a lot of client-server apps. Even if you look at SAP or Oracle, if you had used it earlier, they used to be a client-server only app. Now, they did a wonderful job of moving it to the cloud, but have the same interface, same degree of responsiveness, which is the wrong way to do modernization. But nevertheless, they have the power in the market to stay, right? So client-server apps went away. Now, when you look at big data, so you have this whole concept data lakes, PySpark taking over in terms of new initiatives. Traditional data warehouses still continue, but they have taken a back seat, right? So that's how it has been over the last close to a decade. Now, there's a question for all of you. What do you think changes with GenAI? It's still early. There are a lot of trends. Anything that anybody wants to offer? What are things that are going to become more prominent, less prominent with GenAI? Sorry, I heard somebody. Self-service, all right. Sorry, data engineering? End-to-end data engineering, okay. Use of unstructured data, yeah.
End-to-end pipeline.
End-to-end pipelines. What is going to go down? Manual things. What was the other one about tasks? Repetitive tasks, okay. Yeah, yeah. So all of these are right? So there's no clear answer. Even mine is a guess in some sense on what is the way that we think it will go, right? So hyper automation, like I think some of these things that you said, right? So repetitive tasks, manual actions, end-to-end pipelines being generated by automatic means, all of this means hyper automation, right? That's the wave that we are going to see, right? Everything, people are going to say, automate first, then figure out what the gaps are and fix that again. Right? Now, what's waning, I put in question marks all of these because these are still items in progress. Coding, right? So if you're going to, in terms of trying to, coding is somebody giving you a spec and writing it. Programming is you imagining it and writing it, right? So programming will still stay relevant, but the coding aspect of it will be taken over by agents, right? So if you give the spec, the code will come. Programming languages, if you know one language, that's good enough for you to understand any other language because you're not writing the syntactical structure for each of these code that is auto-generated. So it kind of makes your playground bigger, but at the same time, your responsibility larger, right? So we will talk a little bit further about this, right? Now, what could be the new demand drivers that are coming in this kind of a ecosystem in terms of what is the new kind of work that we will see, new or an increased volume of work from a data engineering perspective? If you look at it, then you have things like descriptive definitions, right? So you have semantic layers, metadata, all of this is very important for LLMs and agents to access so that they can create more accurate output. So that's point one, right? So which you look at as things that we will have to develop more. There are more demands for data governance kind of areas, semantic layers, all of that. Then the second is, we'll also see a trend of more real-time sources, more unstructured real-time sources that can be integrated, looked at. For instance, we had, not necessarily real-time, we had a lot of documentation that is created for research, which gets fed in through a system to capture. There's no structure to the documentation, right? So each research report is different, but we still need to capture some aspects of it so that it's a searchable DB. So data observability in that sense will again come in. Then governance, right? So data governance, data quality. How do you test? How do you look at compliance? As AI becomes more and more ubiquitous, governments are going to step in to see, how it is affecting jobs, affecting people. There will be more guardrails the governments want to set. Now we need to ensure that the guardrails are being met in our systems, the way we design and handle it. So this is a very small snapshot of things. There could be a lot more, but the point here is, there's always this question of, is it going to take away my job? Are things going to be done with a lesser number of people? Yes, the things that we do today will be done with a lesser number of people, but there are things that we will need to do tomorrow that people will need to be employed at. So it's important that we keep upskilling, cross-skilling, reskilling, right? So this is something that I found interesting when I was looking at some of the research for this. Agents, if you look at agents, the agents can also make mistakes, right? They may make mistakes. So how do we look at human in the loop? This one, this company which had put this website out, had a very interesting view, right? So instead of saying human in the loop, they are using human as somebody that the agent will call and demand. They said, I'll give you an API, right? So if you look at the code there, it says, human action await human.operate operation, right? I will have a call center or whatever waiting for the agent to call, right? It's inverting the human in the loop. It's like the agent is calling the shots, saying, when the human needs to intervene for some of the actions. So let's come to the last part of this, which is how are organizations and people having to look at new ways of working, right? So if all of these changes are coming in, what are the guardrails that enterprises need to put in place? What are things that they need to look at as part of managing their infrastructure, managing their flow of work while being compliant, right? So the first thing that they need to look at is prompt engineering, which is said, it will become irrelevant, but it still continues to be relevant. Even if you look at agents, many a time their multiple personas are just the same LLM being wrapped in different prompts. That gives us the thing. And there is also a lot of security things like prompt injection and other things that need to be managed from that perspective. The second thing is context. Now, there's a rapid progress in capabilities related to context, right? The last Google model, Llama 4, all of them have humongous context windows, 10 million tokens that they can look at. But if you send 10 million tokens out to the API and get it back, you're going to have a hefty bill, right? So just for one query. How do you wrap the right context for your right query? Some of this will come from the tooling. Some of this may need to be custom done, depending on the platform and the product that you're working on. Other thing is cost. Cost will become a factor as more and more adoption of these systems happen. Just like in cloud, even if you're working on Databricks, for instance, Databricks cost optimization or AWS cost optimization is a fairly involved task. The same thing will come for LLMs because tokens and other things at an API level, you're doing this. The last couple of things is, one of the things that all these models have is a knowledge cutoff, right? So what data that they've been trained on is not current. Of course, now they can also use the browser and access the latest, but it's not the equivalent of having been trained on it. So the architectures that they recommend are influenced by the training data that they have seen. So if the training data is largely favoring a certain set of, and training data is more openly available, right? If it's favoring a certain set of architecture, that's the one that will keep on getting recommended. The second thing is, if there's a new framework that has come last week, 2 weeks back, 1 month back, it will not be picked up by the LLM. So you need to be aware of this. The organizations need to be aware of it. There are ways, maybe you can, through prompts, have it, or through MCP, have these things discoverable at runtime and make them realistic. But that's something for us to keep looking at. And the last point here is, we need to keep looking at the vendor capabilities as they evolve. A lot of the things we spoke in the accelerators, some of those things, like the earlier session, Snowflake said, we are integrating it into our product, right? If Snowflake is already integrated with Salesforce, some of the data modeling related to Salesforce is going to be much easier when you're doing it in Snowflake or Databricks with SAP, so on and so forth, right? So it's a rapidly evolving space. Companies have to set up the guardrails, decide what, where, and when, and how GenAI has to be used, give freedom to the developers, but at the same time, looking at it. But what does it mean for employees, engineers, right? First thing, engineers have to move from being doers to being, having a boss mindset, right? What does it mean? You need to plan, you need to delegate, you need to review what the agents give you. You need to be clear what you need from the agent. If you are in a MVP phase, you can have a zero shot, hey, build me this, and then look at it, and then refine it. But as you go closer and closer to the production setup, you need to be very prescriptive, be clear on what it needs to adopt, how it needs to, what standards it has to follow, so on and so forth. We spoke about this already, programming languages may not be a constraint for a good programmer. If you know one thing, even now people can pick up fast, but this is going to be even faster. On the fly, you can go in and assess a code of a different language, different paradigm, and look at it. And all of us need to go from digital native to AI native, right? So AI first, think AI first. And the younger generation will be much better at it. Some of us need to get reverse mentoring to see, how we can enable it. There are college kids out there, gaming their essays and everything using ChatGPT. They will game how to do better programming also through that, right? So the last bit I'll leave with you is, one of the things that, again, another creative thing, vibe coding has become very popular. But vibe coding, at some point, if you don't know programming, you're going to get stuck. So somebody built this service saying, you build your vibe code, bring it to me, I'll fix it and improve it and move it to production. Right? There are opportunities there which are spotted by some of these companies, but I just wanted to leave it as a last thing. And that means troubleshooting will always be a skill for employees. If you are able to troubleshoot and solve problems, we are good to go. All right, I think enough of the bells have rung.